I made it back to Salt Lake, and I was going into the post office, and there was an old man sitting under the bush out there, and they're taking a water break. Well, that man was Ammon Hennessy, the great Catholic worker, one of the Dorothy Day's people. And Ammon Hennessy had come to Salt Lake to open the Joe Hill House of Hospitality, one of the Catholic worker houses, and Ammon took me in. And I was there with Ammon for about 8 years at the Joe Hill House. Ammon came to me one day and said, "You've got to be a pacifist." And I said, "How's that?" He said, "Well, you act out a lot. There's a lot of violent behavior." And I was, I was very angry person. And you just act out a lot. And you brawl a lot. You're not any good at it. You're the one that keeps getting thrown through the front door, and I'm tired of fixing the damn thing. You've got to be a pacifist. He had a more fundamentalist way of looking at it. And I said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, I could give you a book by Gandhi, but you wouldn't read it." But he said, "You got to look at nonviolence like your capacity for violence, like an alcoholic looks at booze. Booze will kill an alcoholic unless he has the courage to sit in a circle of people that are like that, put his hand up and say, 'Hi, my name's Utah, I'm an alcoholic.' But then once you own the behavior, you can deal with it. You can have it defined for you by the people whose lives you've messed with. And it's not going to go away. 20 years sober, you're not going to sit in that circle and say, 'Well, I'm not an alcoholic anymore.' You're going to put up your hand and say, 'My name's Utah, I'm an alcoholic.'" He said it's the same with violence. You acknowledge your capacity for violence, you see, and you learn how to deal with it every day, every instant, in every situation for the rest of your life. Because it's not going to go away, but it'll save your life. See, it's a different way of looking at pacifism. I have to be a pacifist, you see. So I said, "Okay, I'll do that, Ammon." And he said, "It's not enough." And I said, "Oh." He said, "You were born a white man in mid-20th century industrial America. You came into the world armed to the teeth with an arsenal of weapons, the weapons of privilege, economic privilege, racial privilege, sexual privilege. You're going to be a pacifist. You're not just going to lay down guns and fists and knives and hard, angry words. You're going to have to lay down the weapons of privilege and go into the world completely disarmed." Well, you try that. I've been at it. Ammon died over 30 years ago, and I'm still at it. But if there's one struggle that animates my life, it's probably that one.
Utah Phillips, the legendary folk musician, died this weekend at his home in Nevada City, California. We'll come back to this 2004 interview in a minute.
Working on a ship we may never sail on. Ship gonna sail someday. Working on a ship we may never sail on. We're gonna build it anyway. Dorothy Day said, "Swords in the plowshares, ship gonna sail someday." Cesar Chavez said, "Viva la huelga, ship gonna sail someday." Judy Berry said, "No more compromise, ship gonna sail someday." Phil Berrigan said, "No more atom bombs, ship gonna sail."
Utah Phillips singing with his circle of friends in Santa Cruz in 2004. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. Legendary folk musician and peace and labor activist Utah Phillips died Friday night at his home in Nevada City, California at the age of 73. I interviewed him in 2004 at the pirate radio station Freak Radio in Santa Cruz. I asked him how he got the name Utah.
Well, that comes in the Army. I was from Utah. Nobody ever heard of anybody from Utah. Have mail call out in the street, and they holler out Utah, and I'm the guy who says, "Here, sir." So the name, 60. It's like calling somebody Tex if they're from Texas, or calling them Louise if they're from Louisiana, maybe, I don't know. So that the name just stuck. The Utah I've always been known as Utah Phillips, and that comes, I guess I can say that now. That's been a closely held secret for years. When I was in Utah there, first learning the kind of music I love, my favorite singer was T. Texas Tyler. So my friend Norman Ritchie, the traveling teenage sage, started calling me Utah Phillips. There you go.
So we're here with Utah Phillips, and wars have defined so much. History books define times by war, but resistance is also there, and that's what often goes unchronicled, except with people like you, who have been chronicling the resistance movements for a long time. And I was wondering if you could talk about some of the people who you feel have made important differences in activism, in resisting the wars.
Well, for that, I would have to go back to Union brothers and sisters. I would have to go back to the Espionage Act in the First World War. In my union, the Industrial Workers of the World, this is my 50th year in the IWW, by the way, my proudest association. It is the only organization I've ever known of that didn't break faith with its elders. Well, when I hit the road, when I went out to try to find out who I really was, to reconstruct my life, when I left Utah, I found those elders and I sought them out. I never thought I would be able to say this, Amy, but most of my elders, most of my great teachers were born the century before last. That I was born in the 1890s. And I think of Fred Thompson and the elders that I've talked to that went through the First World War as Unionists and endured the Espionage Act, endured the enormous persecution, and just kept at it and kept at it. That was an amazing thing, because that was one of the effects of the war. And the same thing happened in the Second World War, was to use that super patriotism and to use the enhanced governmental powers to break the back of the labor movement, especially the radical labor movement, the IWW, and pretty damn well, near succeeded. In spite of that, of that terrible oppression and that awful war, we came out of that war with the beginning of the 8-hour day, with mine safety laws, with child labor laws, We were still winning all the time we were losing.
For young people who've never heard of the Wobblies or the International Workers of the World,
Industrial Workers of the World.
Industrial Workers of the World. Can you explain its origins?
Industrial Workers of the World grew out of the Western Federation of Miners. It started in 1905. The cornerstone of the IWW was the notion that people in the same industry should belong to the same union. Big Bill Haywood there in Colorado. Big Bill's a true American. He was one of the founders of the IWW. His father rode for the Pony Express. His mother was a 49er who got off the wagon train in Salt Lake. Bill was born in Salt Lake. There in Colorado, he'd see how a mine would get struck. So they'd bring in scabs to bring out scab ore, and then it would be transported to the mill on the Union train and milled at the Union mill. He said, all of the people in this industry should belong to one union, because that's union scabbing. So industrial unionism was born as an alternative to craft unionism, like the AFL, organized bodies of workers fighting against each other. And it wasn't just industrial unionism. It was the one big union, the OBU, a union of all skilled, semi-skilled, and unskilled workers in one big union, divided up into industrial departments, syndicalism, which would then replace the government. The means of production in the hands of the producers, produce for use instead of profit, create abundance for workers and nothing for parasites. An end to the wage system. Well, like John Greenway, he called the IWW a banzai charge on capitalism, and that was about right. Well, of course, the union dwindled, after the First World War, the polymer raids, which were so much worse than anything we're experiencing now, but still survived, and now the union is growing, has been growing for quite a long time now.
The Palmer raids?
No, the industrial workers of the world.
Right, but the Palmer raids, if you could say what they were, again, for people who...
Oh, Attorney General Palmer, that was the first Red Scare, the first big Red Scare. The Russian Revolution had been accomplished. right at the, during the First World War. So the first big Red Scare happened when Attorney General Palmer caused thousands of unionists to be jailed and many immigrant workers to be deported without any kind of due process. And it was like an industrial war, and Palmer, they did their best to break up the IWW, and it never succeeded because we have survived and we have persisted.
You talk about the Palmer raids, you talk about the Espionage Act. How do you think the time we're living in now compares?
I think that it's getting, it can get as bad. I think that we're being frog marched into a corporate fascist takeover of the country. And no fooling, I think that we're in the Weimar Republic, and that's another thing that I would encourage young people to understand. That was Germany